Rev up your engines! Here's a Subaru Forester. They sell a reasonable amount of them. And I'm going to show you today why complaining, and complaining a lot, can really save you money in the long run out of your wallet. Because this thing's got 140,000 miles, it's still running pretty good. But it had to have the engine replaced. It's a 2014. From the day he got it, it burned oil. So he took it in and they did a test. And of course, what did they say? Oh, it's within specifications. We're not going to replace the engine. So he kept driving it and driving it, and it was all burning oil. But he started to hear things. And as a matter of fact, a guy who worked at the dealership said, I see a lot of these have problems. You know, you should complain. You should look into this. This is why anybody with a problem like this should always complain. Because enough people complain to the National Highway Traffic Safety.gov website. When they get so many thousands of complaints, they launch an investigation. Then what happens? If they see enough of them, they force the companies to fix the problem. Now, this is a 2014 four-cylinder Subaru with a four-cylinder boxer engines. Now, decades ago, they had a problem blowing head gaskets. But they figured that out, and that's not a problem. The reason this baby was burning oil is because it turns out that Subaru was buying piston rings from a crappy manufacturer. They didn't make them themselves. They bought them from somebody. Just like Toyota bought the fuel pumps from Denso, and they had to recall those millions of Toyotas. Same thing, only there's a bit of a difference between pulling a little top on the back seat off, getting to the fuel pump, putting it in the fuel pump, and replacing the engine. There's a big difference between those two. He persisted. At 80,000 miles, he went in and talked to the master mechanic. And they did the test where they seal it with tape so you can't change anything. And you drive it up to 1,200 miles. Well, he figured, the heck with this, I'm going to drive as close to 1,200 as I can. So he pulled it in with 1,100 something on it, right? Then they said yes. And according to them at least, they replaced the entire block. Because, okay, if the piston rings are worn, then there's too much space. They burn oil, and they're worn, and they will also wear, guess what? The block. And on these things, that's what the block's made out of. Aluminum. Do you know how soft aluminum is? You can actually take an aluminum engine and put it in a stove, like you could pull the aluminum head off, and you can heat it up, not all that hot. You could easily get it done. You get a hammer and hit it, and it will bend. Aluminum is a relatively soft thing. So they replaced the whole bottom end, the block, piston rings, everything. They used the heads over. That was at 80,000 miles. What do we see? We'll turn the key on. It's now got 148,000 miles. Okay, that's 60,000 miles since they had the engine block replaced, and voila, it doesn't burn oil anymore. They fixed it, and they fixed it free because he persisted. Now, if you would have listened to the first guy that said, nah, that's normal, eventually it would have too many miles on it, and they wouldn't be fixing it for free anymore. The same thing with Toyota. Those 2.4 liter engines that they had that burn oil, and the Camrys, if they get too many miles on them, they say, oh, it's too many miles, we're not going to replace your pistons or rebuild the engine anymore. So you got to complain, and complain often if they're not going to do what you want. Because almost every time I get customers coming. I had a guy, if you remember last year, came with one of those stinking little Ram ProMaster little delivery van, right? It's really a Fiat piece of crap. It's made in Italy, engine's Italian. Had like 1,500 miles on the engine's rattling, burning oil. They said, oh, no, it's too new. It's not burning too much oil. Just leave it, right? So they didn't want to fix it at first, but he persisted in complaining, had them fix the engine. Yes, they fixed it correctly. It doesn't burn any oil. 60,000 miles later, he can get 30-something miles a gallon on a highway when he's driving a normal rate. All-wheel drive vehicle. It's great in Massachusetts where it snows. As I said, a lot of times people don't understand. They hear something bad and they think it's always that way. Yeah, decades ago, these had engines that blew head gaskets. These didn't blow head gaskets. They put bad piston rings in it. Now, since this one, in 2014, I don't see any problems with the newer ones burning them. Still, and I stand by this, don't buy a turbocharged boxer engine. It's going to make it burn out faster. That's just how it is. These aren't race cars, but they go plenty fast enough going down a highway. You really don't need a turbocharger. And if there's one thing you listen to me about Subarus, listen to this. Other than these that had bad piston rings, are extremely dependable. They get decent gas mileage, but do not, and I mean do not buy a 6-cylinder boxer Subaru engine. Historically, they have nothing but problems. course, they're trying to compete to put out more horsepower. But all my customers, they have a lot of them ticking away. Now, some of those, which is even worse, some of the 6-cylinder boxer engines, they admitted they put bad valves in them. And they actually had to replace a bunch of the valves in those 6-cylinder engines. But unlike his, that they put a new block in the 4-cylinder and it fixed it, I had customers of those 6-cylinder Subarus and they fixed the engines under their recall for the valves. I'd see some of them 10, 15, 20,000 miles, the engines would blow up because they just didn't build them right. Understand one thing, these days, there's very few mechanics out there that actually have the experience, the technical wherewithal, and the tools to correctly rebuild engines. So if they're rebuilding them, they don't know what they're doing half the time. I've also seen the same thing with Kias. They had all kinds of engine problems with their 4-cylinder engines in the past, burning oil, and then they claimed some of them are made in Alabama. Well, our machine didn't work right there, so they didn't make these parts right, and the metal fragments came up, then the engines blew up. And I've had people have those engines either replaced or repaired, only within a year, year and a half, they blow up again. People are not that good at rebuilding engines anymore. They're so complex, the parts cost so much, and when they're doing something like rebuilding an engine under a warranty, you know they're going to cut corners. They're not going to replace all the parts. Like in the case of this, they did it right. They did the block, but they used the head over. Who's to say whether the heads were worn? In this case, it wasn't. But if you got somebody rebuilding an engine and it's under a warranty, believe me, they're not going to go buy all new parts. Well, we can use this one over, we can use that one over. It's not something you want. You don't want to get a vehicle that's got a bad engine. That's just number one. So just remember, stay away from 6-cylinder Subarus. Now, with 140-something thousand miles on it, he's happy with this. We'll start her up. Sounds like a Subaru. Hear a little bit of noise. It's got 146,000 miles on it. Realize one thing. Boxer engines are relatively noisy engines. Now turn the AC off, you can hear a clanging noise. But that's not the engine. That's a stupid heat shield. And he says when it finally goes, he'll wire it up with some mechanics wire. Or just take it off, throw it away. That's what they're rattling. It doesn't mean anything. Sounds bad, but it doesn't mean anything. Plenty of leg room. And of course, it's Subaru, so it's all-wheel drive. And look, it's got a fancy self-opening tailgate. And as you can see, he's got a lot of stuff in here. You can fit a lot of stuff. They got the great security top, so nobody sees what you got in there. And it's a partially zero emissions vehicle. Subaru's made by Fuji Heavy Industry. It's a big company. And in this case, he didn't know himself, but it is made in Japan. Fuji Heavy Industries, all you can tell is, here's a VIN number. J. J means it's made in Japan. You want a Japanese car? Believe me, you're better off with one made in Japan. It was just a crying shame that they bought their piston rings from a company that did a crappy job. But they owned up and they put another engine in, even though he grumbled and it took them 80,000 miles to decide that they're going to put another engine in. But they did put the engine in. 60,000 miles later, it doesn't burn any oil. It's 30-something miles a gallon on the highway, so that's fine. Let's take it for a ride. Now, they have an interesting mode here, the little X mode. When you push it, the light comes on. Now, they say you can use it off-road, but once you get going over like 10 miles an hour, it shuts itself off anyway. Realize this, it can come in handy for normal people, because if you're stuck in a big snow, you're going slow, you'll be able to get out better. That's what a normal person's using. Let's face it, this is not an off-road vehicle by any stretch of the imagination. That is more for if you're stuck in the snow, or maybe you got a friend who lives in the country and they got a big old dirt road and there's all kinds of dirt puddles. You won't get stuck in the puddles, just don't go over 10 miles an hour, which you're not going to want to do in a dirt road anyway. Let's have a tiny backup camera. Baby, I mean tiny. Look at that thing. It reminds me, well, let's turn the thing off. There. No, it's nice height. It's not outrageously high, but we can go over my little water bump here. Not going to drag anything. Now the transmission, sometimes Subarus have problems with the transmissions, but he has the filter and fluid changed, and 148,000 miles. It's still the original one, and it's not doing any odd shifting really. You know, it's a small engine, so it has to downshift quite a bit, but you can see, hey, it gets up and goes. There's no lag there. Now we come to the road where people are always driving. Nobody's coming. Here we go. And it is all-wheel drive. You notice the wheels did not slip in the rain. That's what they're good for. It's a little engine, but hey, step on the gas, it starts going. Mind you, the engine does make a reasonable amount of noise doing it because it's a boxer engine. And being four-wheel drive, they actually handle quite well. When you're cornering, you don't really get any over or understeer. You really feel secure. You're not going to get any slippage. And he's a smart guy. He doesn't live in the middle of nowhere. He lives in Massachusetts, so he's got all-season tires. He doesn't bother getting 4 snow tires, spending all that money in rims. Hey, all-season tires with all-wheel drive. If you're not going where no man has gone before with 8 feet of snow, it's perfectly fine. Listen from him. Grumble if you got a problem. Because if enough people grumble, and it's a big mistake like piston rings, they will have to recall them. They will have to fix them free. They have no way out of that. It's federal law. And he likes the all-season tires, so he has all-season tires on all the time, even though he lives in Massachusetts. Because realize this. You have an all-wheel drive vehicle. It's not two-wheel and then shifts to four-wheel. It's an all-wheel drive vehicle. You got to have the same exact tires on all of the tires. If one blows, you got to replace all 4 because it all has to be operated at the same speed or it will cause internal wear. You're going to buy 4 snow tires, and then when one goes up, buy another 4 snow tires. He's smart. He's got all-season tires. You didn't have to mess around with it. And he works in hospitals. During respiratory therapy, he's got to come in when there's a problem. He's got to drive in. He had fun during the coronavirus pandemic. He told me that. Boy, he was working his rear end off. And he's totally happy with it. And I find it kind of interesting. It's just about everybody who's brought me these Subarus here on the East Coast. They were either fire EMT, they worked in a hospital. And as long as you stay away from their 6-cylinder engines, they're good vehicles. Plus, as I said earlier, stay away from turbos too. They're just going to wear out faster. You don't need it. They go fast enough. And let's face it, what are these made for? All-wheel drive in the snow. How fast do you want to drive in the snow? It doesn't matter how good the system is, you're still going to slide. Ages ago, we took a vacation out in Colorado. We went on an icy lake covered with snow with these all-wheel. They slid all over the place when you're really punching it, you know. It's for a slower speed. So, hey, kudos to Subaru, with the exception of they had to replace the engine. Kind of a big deal there. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.